Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 179 of Into the Outer Realms. I am your cosmic host, cosmic traveler out on the byways and the highways of the outer realms, Joey Medea. I really appreciate you being with me tonight, where so much is going on in the world, where we're potentially on the brink of maybe some terrible things. We don't know. And everything I've tried to do on the show, especially since Tanya moved on to other things about 80 episodes or so ago, what I've been doing with my colleague Craig Ansel, and otherwise with this Parallels, Patterns, and Pathways, this is the 7th installment here, is trying to figure out how we got here, what we could learn from it, to diffuse the idea that everything is a conspiracy theory by showing that there is historical precedent for these things. And we see the same players over and over again. And it was really striking me as I was doing my research for tonight for the 1970s, ufology, and especially the deep state, how much of what is going on right now today up to this very minute can be traced back to things that happened in the 1970s. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I had planned on not spending a lot of time on the ufology part, although there are major cases. There was so much going on with abduction and so on in the 1970s. My beautiful former co-host and I, Tanya, we did some shows on these contactee abductee cases. You can go back to the archives. In general, your best bet for watching this show, accessing old episodes, is to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm not great about liking, subscribing, sharing, and all of that kind of thing, but I do think it's important here. So let's roll the opening. We're going to go through the 70s. I promise to get you out of here in an hour. I have less material than usual, but it's very salient. And at the end of the evening, before I let you go, I just have a couple thoughts about what might happen in the next couple of days, in the ensuing weeks, and just to keep that vibration energy high. And I really appreciate you being here tonight, because you could be any place else. Also, everyone who watches the show after the fact, and I know that's a very good number of people, and everyone who listens to the show on ERT Radio Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. 3 weeks from now, this will air. Last night was Craig and I's show with the Federal Reserve, and so much of what is happening right now is being driven by this desire to go digital, to do these everything apps, basically to take technology as a means of control, the way they have wanted to and planned to for a really long time. So welcome. Let's roll the opening with music by my son, Jeremy.
There exists a realm beyond our wildest dreams, a realm beyond reality that the gatekeepers and guardians have always told us consists of nothing but tricks of the eye, weather balloons, swamp gas, sand cranes, fairy tale myths of monsters, crackpot conspiracy theories, and desperate cries for attention.
We know this realm exists, and it's just beyond the horizon. The preset path, the well-worn walkways where the cynics want us to stay.
Instead, give this a listen. Put on your headphones, adjust your volume, close your eyes, and fasten your mental seatbelts, because the twilight-tinged turnoff from reality's alluring highway is looming just ahead.
We're about to leave the plane of the easily explained, couldn't possibly be's, and the no way I just saw what I saw's, for the spaces and places where everything is possible, and if you stay long enough, even probable. We're about to take a journey into the outer realms.
Wow, so many really intelligent researchers, authors, colleagues with us tonight. This is awesome. I'm going to jump right in. I really would like to get this done in an hour tonight. So we're going to start right in 1970 with a very interesting thing. And it just occurred to me, we start with Israel. We start with Israel in 1970 with Uri Geller, who is known for bending spoons. That's what James Randi debunked him on and devoted so much of his professional debunking to try to destroy Uri Geller on the spoon thing. But that just scratches the surface of Uri Geller. If you really want to know about Uri Geller, you should read books by Annie Jacobson about the psi programs going on at the Pentagon and so on and so forth. But in 1970, Uri Geller is map dowsing for Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan for archaeological artifacts. Over and over, we're going to see just how much the CIA, just how much the KGB, just how much the Mossad and the defense ministry in Israel believed in remote viewing, believed in psi powers. It's definitely a theme in the 1970s, as you're going to see. Uri Geller spent some time in 1970 at SRI, which is Stanford Research Institute, which became SRI International. So we're talking about Hal Puthoff, who's still very, very prevalent in the business, very, very close with Robert Bigelow. Take that for what you will. But guys like Russell Tartt, guys like Ingo Swann, guys like Pat Price, Joe McGonigal, very, very talented guy, and a woman named Rosemary Smith, who I'm going to tell you about tonight. So Uri is at SRI and he's at Livermore Labs, and what he can do blows people away. On one hand, it's concerning. On another hand, it's absolutely astonishing. April 30th of 1970, Nixon, of course, there's the Vietnam War hanging over a lot of the 1970s. He orders a draft of an additional 150,000 young men and also the invasion of Cambodia. Well, just a couple days later, of course, is Kent State, as Neil Young sang, "For Dead in Ohio," where I live right now, the murder of 4 students protesting the war. The war protest was really powerful at this time, and you're going to see John Lennon here involved with that and the price that he almost paid. August 19th of 1970, 6 school children in Bukit Metzajam, Malaysia, see a UFO, and they see a therianthropic alien with, looking at the sketches that the young people drew, to me it's like a fox-like face, and Anubis type thing, fox, wolf, somewhere jackal, somewhere in there. Now, in the autumn of 1970, a Catholic priest named Pellegrino Ernetti invents something called a chronovisor. Now, this is basically an electro-optical hologram cabinet with cathode tubes for viewing, experiencing the past and the future, which makes me think of the Orion cube, this yellow cube device that was supposedly given to Eisenhower in 1954 when he met with the aliens, or shortly thereafter. It could have been his 1956 meeting, but something that would allow people to see the future. There's interesting things about people in the 70s, remote viewing, seeing the future, seeing all kinds of interesting things. So I don't know that it's an accident that in autumn of 1970, this Catholic priest invents, quote unquote, this chronovisor device. Also in the 1970s is start of what Bill Moore and Jamie Shandera, who have talked about so much in terms of Majestic 12 and the microfilms and the documents and all that, not going to lay on it tonight, but the Aviary was this potential group of active retired military. So they had names like Condor and Hawk and so forth, and that's why it was called the Aviary. These were intelligence officers who were possibly feeding this information about Majestic 12. But was it all false flag, disinformation? That is what we never know. And I can't tell you why, for lots of reasons. But I've been spending a lot of time looking at the Aviary through connections that I didn't know that I have as far as the Aviary went. And again, Jamie Shandera, I've tried so hard to get him on the show. He just doesn't want to talk. So anyway, In 1971, the Montauk child experiments begin. Camp Hero, Farmer Air Force radar. If you saw the banner I did for tonight, you saw that radar up there. In several weeks, Craig and I on Sinister Mysteries, we're going to do Montauk. I'm going to wear my Stranger Things t-shirt tonight, or one of them, because actually that show was originally called Montauk, and that's really what it's based on. So the experiments with 11, so on and so forth, incredibly nefarious. We told you, Craig and I, a lot through MK Ultra about child experiments, and so really definitely tune in for that Montauk show. Now in 71, 72, John Lennon becomes the target of the FBI for his anti-war rhetoric, he and Yoko Ono. And a lot of people were listening to him. It was concerning to Nixon. It was concerning to Hoover. And they spent a year trying to deport him, get him out of the country. They killed who they could in the 1960s, and now they're moving on to other things. Deportation, all of these practices come back to bite Nixon in the butt, because the people above him, the global elite, right, the security state, whatever you want to call it, the shadow government, become displeased with him, and he winds up leaving office in disgrace. Now, also in 1971, a man named David Adair designed an electromagnetic rocket propulsion device, this electrogravimetric that we've been talking about, that started in the 50s with Otis Carr, that was developed by T. Townsend Brown, all these things that I've been talking about on these shows. They're all come together here. Well, Adair wins a USAF award, and part of his reward for his great work is he gets to meet with the United States Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay, MJ-12, Majestic 12, and apparently he's taken to Area 51 where he sees alien technology. So this is just another data point of someone else who winds up being read in because of the work that they're doing, and they say, hey, look, I saw this stuff in the places that we think. Ron says, I lived in Pleasanton, California, moved there in 1971 in June. I performed in Pleasanton, California a couple years ago. I did my pirate show. That's a wonderful, terrific little town. Let's see here. 1971. Astronaut experiencer Gordon Cooper urges United Nations Secretary General Kurt Waldheim to push on UFOs. What happens just even at the thought of Waldheim looking into this stuff? All of a sudden, allegations pop up that Waldheim was a Nazi. And it caused a lot of trouble for him in his life. There was never really any definitive proof. The best that they could say was that he knew about some things that he could do nothing about. He was Austrian. And so this becomes a very important lesson about what happens when you poke around. And you're going to hear what happens, what Carter poked around, and possibly when Nixon poked around. It's punishment after punishment after punishment. And this is the United Nations Secretary General there in 71. Also remember the name Gordon Cooper. So there's some interesting things going on with him as all of this unfolds. Notice I said he's an experiencer. You might remember from the 1950s episode, in 51 and 57, he had experiences with UFOs. And then as an astronaut in the space program, the U.S. space program, he was very vocal. Buzz Aldrin, right? He goes back and forth. Edgar Mitchell came home very, very changed, started the Noetic Institute. But Gordon Cooper, till the day he died, was very clear and very consistent that these things exist. And again, it's going to come up. So April 1971, anybody who thinks the Space Force was invented or created by Donald Trump, it was not. Nixon authorized the Space Force in April 1971. A 200-man spacecraft supposedly was part of this called Solar Warden, which Craig and I have talked about. If that little tidbit is not enough, there is an entry in Ronald Reagan's diary from June 11th, 1985, while he references solar warded. And in a couple weeks, when I do the 1980s, I will talk about Close Encounters of the Third Kind and some very provocative statements that Ronald Reagan made after seeing that film. June 3rd, 1971, of course, is the Pentagon Papers in the New York Times. Just how much the government was dishonest about the war, just how the government is always dishonest about the war, that the government is now dishonest about the proxy war. Now we have two of them. We have Ukraine or Russia, billions of dollars, weapons being sent. We now have aircraft carriers. Ironically, Ronald Reagan is off the coast of Korea, and we have a major presence near Israel. So 1972, let's get into it. The remote viewing program begins at the Stanford Research Institute, which I told you about. Russell Targ, Harold Putoff, Ingo Swann, on and on and on. I will give you some really good examples of what these guys were doing with this remote viewing program, because it's fascinating. In 1972, there's a grant proposal to the California legislation from the Center for the Study and Reduction of Violence. They want money so they can implant electrodes and remote monitoring devices in prisoners' brains. This is big MK Ultra stuff, although they're calling it MK Search at the time. And we're coming up to the point here. I keep giving you little tidbits about how the 70s are just building on themselves, these events year after year. The CIA really kind of blows up with all of this kind of stuff, and it becomes a real fulcrum moment that the American people lose out on what else is new. June 17th, intimately connected, 1972, is the break-in at the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. This is, of course, the Watergate Hotel. We're talking about G. Gordon Liddy. We're talking about E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt, who Craig and I talked about last week. This is the guy who said, yeah, it was the CIA. This was an inside job that they did on Kennedy. Not a lone shooter. E. Howard Hunt might have been there. He might have been one of the tramps, one of the hobos. We don't know. If you're really interested in Watergate, and I grew up watching those hearings, I was a young kid. I think it really, my mom would watch it, and I remember the small TV in our house in North Bergen, New Jersey, down in the basement of my grandparents' house, watching this and not knowing what the hell was going on, but being completely fascinated. I have a predisposition toward theater. This was theater, but I highly recommend two programs: Gaslight and Nixon's Plumbers, both miniseries. One, I think, about 3 years old, or 2 years old, and one just a year old. Woody Harrelson and Justin Theroux are amazing as E. Howard Hunt and as Libby. So in late January 1973, as you can see, we're moving right along here. A military advisor to Eisenhower named Brigadier General Robert Schulzen, I think I've talked to him about him on Triple P before, is suddenly forced to retire. He was a liaison with all the ex-presidents, with Eisenhower, Truman, Johnson, all these guys who were read in the know, heavily involved. Nixon had this guy talking to them. He was very, very close with Ike and definitely knew about the UFO program. He is forced to retire. This kicks off at the start of 1973, a big kind of purging and this huge void that I'm going to give to you in a couple of minutes of all these deaths between 69 and 73 of all these important people, which really paved the way for Nixon, Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller, of course, was very busy reinventing the government and all of that for Ike and contributing ultimately to the military-industrial complex. But Nixon, his guy Kissinger, George H.W. Bush, Rumsfeld, all these guys, the Republican cabal, that some of them were still there, of course, for the Iraq, Afghanistan. they get rid of this guy. And Nixon is starting to purge these guys because February 2nd, and it was supposed to be February 14th, but on February 2nd, Nixon cans the director of the CIA, Richard Helms. Helms, who had been burning the records, getting rid of all the MK Ultra stuff. Suddenly, he is gone. And then we're here. Let's see here. We got a conversation here going on. Oh, about Ronald Reagan. So we're going to go sideways on that. I will be talking about Reagan quite a bit in the 1980s. But what I end tonight will really give you a seed for 2 weeks from now about what Reagan did to ensure his presidency. It may change your mind about Ronald Reagan, or it might not. Oh, yes. Tanya says it was called Gaslit, not Gaslight. Thank you. That's the other one that stars Sean Penn and Julia Roberts. So there you go. So anyway, February 19th, 1973. You got to read Paul Blake Smith book, which I'm reading right now. It's awesome. And I pulled some material from tonight for it about Nixon, Gleason, and the extraterrestrial encounter. But on February 19th, 1973, Nixon and Gleason, who were golf buddies, they lived near each other in Florida. Jackie Gleason had this huge fascination with UFOs. He had this giant library. He had a house built that looked like a UFO. It looked like the mothership, he called it, with a glass ceiling, and it was a saucer-shaped thing. He had this house that he lived in, and it had a guest house, and it had another outbuilding that he called the Scout Ships. It was very interesting because Roswell, Lonnie Samora sighting, so many of these others were possibly scout ships for mothercraft at different points in history. So anyway, Nixon and Gleason go to Homestead. Now, before work from people like Paul Blake Smith and others, the lore was that they're playing golf and Nixon's like, hey, Jackie, I want to show you this thing. Let's go right now. It wasn't like that. This was all carefully set up. Smith has looked at the phone logs, so on and so forth. Like Ike in 1954, there are no records of Nixon's whereabouts for like 11 hours. I think it's from 8 p.m. at night on the 19th to like 8 a.m. in the morning on the 20th. Supposedly, they go to this lab at Homestead Air Force Base. Gordon Cooper might have been there. He was at the Pro-Am golf tournament that Jackie Gleason was throwing at the time. Of course, an experiencer, very into disclosure, all that. Gordon Cooper might have been there. Anyway, they go to a lab, and supposedly there are 2 4-foot-tall EBEs. Now, Gleason was really thrown by this. It was more than he bargained for. Although Gleason had been offering prior to this $1 million if someone could give him proof. He didn't want to hear from abductees. He didn't want any of that. He wanted the hardest proof possible. And boy, did he get it. He was upset. He was angry about the secrecy. He was bitter. He didn't speak about this for a full year, and he was very shaken up. His career was not going well. You know, the whole sketch comedy thing was going away. He was drinking a lot. His marriage to Beverly was falling apart. But James Fox, a documentarian I deeply, deeply respect, just so much integrity. He says that Gleason told Hollywood producer Jeff Sagansky that he had proof without giving any details. Here's the interesting thing. Paul Blake Smith says that $1 million that Jackie Gleason was offering, Nixon probably wanted that money, and that's why he took him to Homestead in order to pay hush money to his plumbers, to Libby and E. Howard Hunt and all the rest of these sketchy CIA guys who were probably also involved with Kennedy and certainly were involved with trying to off Fidel Castro in Cuba. So there you go. That's pretty crazy stuff. What happens just a couple months later? There's another purge. Secretary of the Air Force Robert Siemens Jr. suddenly retires. The guy who would have been able to facilitate this visit to Homestead, maybe he regretted it. Maybe something else happened. And all of a sudden, he's out. Yeah, Charles says what was going away was live TV. They were going more to other kinds of things, deeper, darker sketch dramas and things like that, canned things. This is the rise of Columbo and the 1 hour specials, the movies of the week, and all of that kind of thing. These live things, not to go too far sideways, were very, very expensive to produce. And guys like Gleason were making a ton of money. So also in 1973, shortly after this, Old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra sings at the White House. He also makes a $50,000 donation to Nixon, and he also facilitates $100,000 donation that gets a mafioso release. So we all know about, Old Blue Eyes and the mafia and the CIA, the mafia in Cuba, so on and so forth. So Old Blue Eyes is facilitating this stuff because Nixon needs money. Why? He wins his reelection in a total landslide. Like, there is no question in 72. Yet, all this money is coming in. Payoff money, right? I'm getting my guinea up here a little tonight. So, check this out. I'm talking about Nixon filling a void with Kissinger, Bush. This is astonishing. All natural deaths, but still, check this out. Allen Dulles, MJ-12, CIA, United Fruit Company, enemy of JFK, probably facilitated through Project Environment. Kennedy's assassination after he was forced to resign, dies in January of 69. Ike dies in March of 69. General Cabell, who was second in command for Dulles and whose brother was the mayor of Dallas during the Kennedy assassination, dies in May of 71. J. Edgar Hoover dies in May of 72. Truman dies in December of 72. LBJ dies in January of 73, and Admiral Sidney Sowers, who was the first head of the CIA and was also part of MJ-12, dies in January 73. So all of these people are gone. It's astonishing. It's amazing. Even mafioso Frank Costello, who is supposedly above the five families, the most powerful mafioso of them all, dies in February 73. So while Nixon, the night before he's planning this trip to Homestead, Frank Costello kicks off. It's amazing. Now it's a brave new world. It's new players. Craig and I have talked at length about Condor, Air America, all this kind of stuff. What was going on in the Emerald Triangle there, in the Golden Triangle in the East, and all of that, bringing drugs into America. It's another reason why Reagan don't know about all of that. But we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Although it'll be far from a smear job on Reagan, but there are things that need to be talked about. So in 73, a bunch of other stuff happens. I'll go through them. OPEC, right? The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies in the Middle East is raising oil prices and causing energy shortages. I remember that. There was odds and evens with license plates, gas rationing. We had this giant thing that we would fill up gallons and gallons and gallons of gas, go to the gas station, but don't plan on leaving before like 3 hours to get your gas on the right day. Very similar to what's going on with the BRICS, devaluing the dollar. I understand California gas is $6 a gallon. Any California watchers, if you can confirm that. Here in Ohio, it's actually fairly low. But also, too, when you're talking about oil production, the stats I was listening to today, it was like $6.5 billion worth of oil was produced from Iran, exported in 2020. It jumped to like 20-something billion dollars the first year of Biden's office, and then the next year it went up to like 60 billion. That is a lot of money to be used for a lot of things. So gas is getting a little cheaper in Connecticut. Well, you got to keep everybody placated while you got other stuff going on. Meanwhile, independent people are connecting the dots right and left. In 73, a UFO disables radar at Pittsburgh International Airport, not far from where I live. 73, too, Ingo Swann. I've talked many times about how life-changing his book Penetration was for me. He moves a secure magnetometer needle he couldn't see, and then he draws it. This was very concerning to the people. I think this was also at Livermore Laboratories. This was very, very concerning. This was a high security thing. And he not only drew the darn thing in great detail, but he moved the needle on it, which he shouldn't have been able to do. Also in 1973, he describes Jupiter's rings 6 years before Voyager 1 made the discovery that they were there. Now, from 73 to 78, Stephen Greer, he is the great, possibly trickster, maybe a disinformation agent, maybe a great hero in the disclosure movement. Not here to deep dive into that, but supposedly, according to his autobiography, he has a series of EBE UFO encounters starting near Boone, Asheville, North Carolina in 73 and going through at least 1978. 73, also a very important encounter, if you will. As a teenager, Darryl Anka. Now, I've spoken about Darryl Anka before anytime that I've done shows on channelers. I just got a request today to do a book by a channeler that I really respect. I reviewed one of her former books. She thought I had some good insights. Darryl Anka channels an entity named Bashar. Watch this. Again, watch videos. Bashar, Bashar. Now, Darryl Anka comes from a background of science fiction special effects in Hollywood. Don't let that throw you. I am an actor. I'm an acting teacher, pretty keen on communication studies and all that kind of thing. And all I can tell you is when Darryl Anka transfers into Bashar, everything changes. His vocabulary, his syntax, the sheer speed that words come out almost without a breath is almost unreplicable. Plus, Darryl Anka has been hooked up by neurologists, and parts of his brain not only light up that shouldn't light up when he is channeling Bashar, but his neurocognitive processing speed goes up, and that should not happen. So anyway, check out Darryl Anka, listen to Bashar. Even if the guy's putting on an act, the things that come out of Bashar's mouth are well worth listening to. Anyway, Anka and 3 others, while driving to the San Fernando Valley, see 2 bright lights in the distance. Soon after, they see a triangular UFO. With one witness, the next week, he sees it again. Now, Craig and I did an episode on Pine Gap, Australia. You see how this all is folding and becoming a tapestry. We have the same ingredients in this growing stew of sinister mysteries and really deceitful behavior. But in 73, a cartographer working near Pine Gap, Australia, part of the Five Eyes program, reports a disc over that facility. The disc sends down a beam, and a few minutes later, the beam stops. A couple minutes after that, a beam from the facility comes up to the disc. This stuff is really, really deeply buried. When we did the Pine Gap episode, I knew that there was UFO lore around it, but trying to find this, dust it off, it's a chore. It took a lot of hours to find this stuff. So in 73, Governor Jimmy Carter reports October 1969 UFO sighting to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. Carter was a believer, and this is going to come back to bite him in the butt. It may have cost him re-election. 1973, Director of Central Intelligence Richard Helms destroys most MKUltra records, officially ending MK Search. MK Search, ended in June 1972. So as Helms is getting ready to be booted out, he's burning all the stuff. I probably should have put this earlier in the timeline. In April 1973, Jacques Vallée is working on ARPANET. Just know that. Vallée can be very, very complicated. He definitely was a government insider. Don't believe he's a disinformation agent. He's done a ton of good work. His name will come up again tonight, but just know that he was working on ARPANET, the early security and information among scientists out of ARPA, the Pentagon. He was working on that project. Now, in May 1973, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a man reported a UFO shined a beam of light on his car, and the car became transparent. I especially wanted to include that because if you've seen any of the episodes or heard any of the many interviews I've done with other podcasters and radio stations about Tanya and I's abduction encounter, missing time, parallel dimensions, and all that, part of that was the car went transparent. So when I found this factoid, this was really, really important in trying to make sense of what Tanya and I experienced. Now, another really big sighting, October 11, 73, Calvin Parker, Charlie Hickson abduction, Pascagoula, Mississippi. In 2020, Pascagoula police office told Calvin they had fielded 50 calls that night about strange lights in the sky. This is one of those that Philip Klass and the rest of the professional debunkers have wanted to shred, and they haven't done a great job. I invite you to seek out our episode on abductions and contactees, where we really deep dive into this very, very compelling abduction. 73, 74, Bigfoot UFO sightings in Southwest PA. It is like an epidemic. It is bigger than a flap. It is crazy. And please, Tanya and I have had the pleasure to be on the same itinerary with Stan Gordon several times. Read his book, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook. I'm not a big Bigfoot guy, but when it comes to Bigfoot and UFOs connected, I'm definitely interested. That is an amazing, amazing, amazing casebook. Hello, colleague Craig Ansel is here with us. Appreciate you joining us tonight, good sir. Been talking to you about you and our Sinister Mysteries work a lot. February 5th, 1974, remote viewing helps police with the Patty Hearst kidnapping. There are some real big data points, even though some of these SOBs in the military-industrial complex have said, nothing to see, we shut it down, it was a waste of time, nothing but a bunch of kooks. You are going to see evidence after evidence after evidence tonight that is far from the case. They really helped locate Patty Hearst with that. Help fight the algorithm. Send an emoji, share this to your feed, and like-minded groups, subscribe. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. You're always better at that than I am. So let's move on to 1974. We're doing good. Two officers at Maxwell Air Force Base write a report entitled, Should the USAF Reopen Project Blue Book? They said that the weather inversion for the Hills encounter, which I talked about last time, was bunk. And the UFO had not only been tracked on a weather station's radar, but also by the radar at Pease Air Force Base, very near to where it happened. Again, watch that abductee, contactee episode. You'll get a lot of really good stuff. And also engage with the work of Stanton Friedman, who Tanya and I met just 2 days before he passed away, and Kathleen Martin, the niece of the Hills. This is beyond, a doubt about this. Also in 74, a woman named Dorothy Izatt, Izatt, starts filming UFOs. There's some great documentaries about this with some amazing footage. They were able to call them in and all the rest. Over a period of decades, she filmed over 30,000 feet of UFOs, anomalous lights, and these beautiful sky worms. And you can see this stuff on documentaries. It is amazing, amazing stuff. In August 8th, of course, 1974, Nixon resigns. This was probably punishment from the central bank and the CIA. See, Nixon thought that he could use the fact that he knew the truth about the Kennedy assassination as leverage against the CIA. It's part of the reason he got rid of Helms, and the CIA wasn't playing ball. They killed Kennedy. They most assuredly killed his brother Bobby. They were so powerful by this time, and George H.W. Bush is involved in all the rest of it. So Vice President Ford becomes president, a total puppet. About 12 days later, Ford nominates Nelson Rockefeller to be vice president, one of the ultimate insiders from one of the ultimate insider families, now becomes vice president. Was the plan eventually to get him to be president? I don't know. Ambassador to NATO at the time is Donald Rumsfeld. And we know from Ukraine and Russia that NATO, this is all wrapped up here together in the geo-energy politics. And also Chief of Staff, Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, of course, goes on to be under various presidents. And RNC chair at the time, directing the Republican Party, is George H.W. Bush. Now, on October 25th, 1974, there's a hunter named Carl Higdon. He's hunting elk. He comes across at Medicine Bow National Park in Wyoming 5 elk that are in a state of suspended animation. He fires his rifle at them, and the bullet hits something invisible, crumples, folds, and falls to the ground. After that happens, he suddenly sees a 5-foot by 7-foot translucent cube. You're going to hear about something similar soon. And he's given a pill by a humanoid, and he's taken inside the ship. He's taken to a planet. He's put on a table, but they realize he had a vasectomy, and so they send him home. He is rejected. Similar to when they said to me, not a good subject, not a good subject, not a good subject, because I just wouldn't go along with the film that I was being shown, the artificial set that I was being shown in 2009. So 16 December 1974, William Kobe, CIA director under Ford, says to the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the Rockefellers and their cronies, family secrets are best left in the closet. So they're feeling really good about all this stuff. Problem is, 6 days later, eminent reporter for the New York Times, Seymour Hersh, comes out with a blockbuster article about the abuses of the CIA. MK Ultra, giving LSD to people against their will or without their knowledge, so on and so forth. All the work of Sidney Gottlieb, all of that. That's where this breaks. So the crap is hitting the fan. Get into 1975. A private plane is over Pine Gap now in Australia. A large white object leaves at a high rate of speed. Now, the people on the plane report what they saw. They're told, shut up and forget it. The same thing's going to be told to Jimmy Carter pretty soon. In 1975, Sandy Larson UFO abduction. You can look that one up. It's very interesting. Also in 75, I mentioned Penetration, and this is in Ingo Swann's book, Changed My Life. It's like if you read that book, I don't know if Lori's watching today. It's one of those books that you read it, and if you believe it, your worldview is going to have to change. Everything opens up for you. There's no middle ground. Ingo Swann gets a message to leave his home in New York City and go to the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian. He meets with 2 twins who do not seem human to him. He's given some coordinates. That's how remote viewing works. And he's going, is this the moon? And they're saying, tell us what you see. And he's saying, come on, is this the moon? Because I see structures and I see beings. And a fundamental rule of remote viewing gets broken on that day because those beings turn and look at him. They shut it down and they send him home. In 75, John Keel publishes Mothman Prophecies after 8 years of work, almost 9 years of work on all of that kind of stuff. 75, the Vietnam War ends, and the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, seizes power in Cambodia. Genocide, just another example of American foreign policy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so on and so forth. We're picking up, leaving absolute carnage. So the rise of ISIS and all the rest of it, we've seen it over and over and over again, which is part of this plan, as I'll share it with you in a little bit. So another remote viewer, very talented, Pat Price, former police officer, dies of a heart attack, no autopsy, buried in an unmarked grave in the Hollywood Hills. He dies, in a Las Vegas hotel room. What did he see that he wasn't supposed to see? October 20th, 1975. TV movie of the week comes out about the Hills, starring James Earl Jones, Estelle Parsons. It's not great. Watch it. It's not great. But it's called The UFO Incident. October 20th, 1975. Now I'm going to stick something in here real quick to follow the timeline. November 2nd, 1975, William Colby, who tried to assure the Rockefeller folks at the Council on Foreign Relations that the skeletons would stay in the closet, is forced to resign as CIA director. President Ford's request, but you got Rumsfeld, who's the chief of staff. You got Vice President Nelson Rockefeller undermining Colby's disclosure about the CIA. Colby has a change of heart. He wants to come clean, and they do not let him. All right, again, October 20th, film comes out about the Hills, the UFO incident. This airing of this movie is weaponized in a certain incident. November 5th, 1975, of course, Travis Walton. He's 22 years old, Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. He and fellow workers see some kind of light. They all pile in the truck. They follow it. He gets out of the truck. They can't stop him. He approaches. He gets hit with a beam. He falls to the ground. They skedaddle, and he disappears for a week, and he tells a fantastical story. I was just in communication today. Someone who's a fan of the show, I deeply appreciate it, wanted to know where they could watch the archive after watching the Kennedy assassination show. She has met with Travis Walton. Her colleagues have. I've never spoken to anybody who talked to Travis Walton who didn't believe him. And Philip Glass and all the rest of those provincial debunker, nosy, nasty naysayers, as Stanton Friedman called them, were putting up money and every other thing to try to get these guys to change their story, and they didn't. 76, the cattle mutes begin around Dulce Base and Archuleta Mesa. Paul Benowitz, who I've talked about at length through MJ12, the guy literally driven crazy by Richard Doty and Bill Moore because he heard things that he wasn't supposed to hear. Out in California, Paul Benowitz is investigating these cattle mutes. July 7th, 1976, journalist John Luttrell tells Stanton Friedman in a letter that he had spoken to more than 12 people who had seen something strange in the sky that night that the Hills had their abduction in 61. So another interesting pattern, right? It takes until 2020, 25 years later, for a cop to tell Calvin Parker, we got 50 calls about this thing. It takes 15 years for this journalist to tell Stanton Friedman, yeah, we had about a dozen calls of people who also saw things. So the truth will out. It gets there, and we just have to stay on top of it and put it all together in one place for study. That's what I'm trying to do here. So September 19th, famous UFO sighting. Greer brought these guys out at his first big disclosure project, I think in 90. In Tehran, Iran. Ironic again. 2 Imperial Iranian Air Force F-4 Phantom IIs made by McDonnell Douglas. And Iran has these in 1976. Why? Because the Shah was our guy. They installed him in the 50s, got rid of a democratically elected guy to put in the Shah to facilitate that oil coming. Phantom II's instrumentation weapons failures. Major Parviz Yafari, squadron commander, described it as flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights so bright he was not able to see its body. On approach, his communication system shuts off. He attempts to fire a Sidewinder infrared guided missile, but the equipment shuts down, preventing missiles from firing. That's a theme, right? His systems are restored as he moves away. It was protecting itself in a very passive way. Philip J. Klass said they saw Jupiter or some other planet, and he blamed pilot incompetence for the equipment failures. It's amazing what these debunkers say to insult these pilots, to insult these highly, highly trained, very skilled people, calling it pirate error or, oh, they mistook Jupiter. Really? Jupiter made their systems, all shut off? Oh, no, they were just incompetent pilots flying Air Force F-4 Phantom IIs. Take a look at these things, guys, armed with Sidewinder missiles. Not just any jabroni gets to do that. Also, scientific skeptic, because now we have different categories of skeptics. So this is a scientific one. Brian Dunning attributed the bright flashes to meteors. Yeah, that's what was going on. These Iranian pilots were obviously morons. October 3rd, 76, a UFO is seen over Tulsa. Now, November 5th of 76, something interesting happens. Ford doesn't want Colby's deputy director of the CIA, Lieutenant General Vernon Walters, to take his place. Walters was instrumental in protecting the CIA from Watergate. He doesn't want this guy around. So Colby stays a little longer until George H.W. Bush can be sworn in as CIA director, another highly read-in guy about Cuba and all other kinds of things. UFOs, I'm not so sure about, but and then Henry Kissinger, Ford's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. This is really game on for these guys. 76, the Church Committee investigates the CIA, investigates international assassinations, Patrick Lumumba, and so on and so forth. All the attempts on Fidel Castro, but they get nowhere. Of course, they get nowhere. The CIA is an absolute juggernaut from this point. It's been 20-something years since Ike saw it happening. November 76, Carter starts pushing on UFOs. Now, Stephen Greer says that director of the CIA, Bush, told him nothing. So he went elsewhere. He talked to lawyers. He tried to get the Vatican to talk to him. Carter was determined to know. This is what we know from one of his aides, one of his staff. After the meeting with Bush, Carter goes to his desk and he cries. So maybe Bush did disclose. We also hear that a suit went to Jimmy Carter and said, quote unquote, if you would like to complete your first term as president, not if you'd like to have a second term, because that already wasn't in the cards. If you'd like to complete your first term as president, you'll keep your goddamn mouth shut. And that's a direct quote, so pardon me. Let's get into 77 here. Three different scientific labs studied the pink powder that was on Betty Hill's dress the day after the abduction, and they all said that the properties were very hard to explain. Now, in February 77, Admiral Stansfield Turner is appointed CIA director, so we have this revolving door. Who's going to play the game the best? June of 77, Terry Lovelace and others at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. Now, this is near Whiteman Air Force Base. They take these hiking trips, and one night they see a triangular UFO, and Terry the next day reports joint pain. The next night, 30 feet above them, they see 12 to 15 EBEs in a meadow. One of Lovelace's friends recalls the abduction. He winds up going to the hospital. A FOSI investigates, right? That's the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, Richard Doty, and they want to muck with these things. But in 2012, a piece of metal the size of a fingernail is found in Terry Lovelace's leg. And in 2016, 24 films are taken of that object. 18 of those go missing. That used to happen to Roger Lear all the time. And they see in his calf a flower pattern of objects. So there you go. June 1977. We've talked about this before. Maybe having to do with the chronovision, maybe the Nazi alien contacts. We don't know. Von Braun is pretty much on his deathbed, and he says to one of his close mentees, Carol Rosen, that a fake UFO will be the final card of 5 ways to get and keep global control. The first was rise of communism. Let that go so we can have the Cold War. We're still looking at that today, right? Terrorism, we're still looking at that today. Possibly imminent. Rogue third world states in the Middle East, such as ISIS. Okay, we're living that. And asteroids, which they touch on, they get off. Asteroids, they come in and out all the time. June 30th of 77, Carter cancels the B-1A bomber program. You do not want to cancel big projects for the defense contractors. They don't like that. You don't want to broker peace. They don't like that. Ike tried to broker peace. It blew up in his face, right? They sent the U-2, ironically, hey, let's just take one of our own things and screw things up so that the Ike Khrushchev conference is canceled. And Kennedy paid with his life, as did his brother. So from July 77 to November 78, I find this very curious and it's very unusual. UFOs near Colores, Brazil. Beams of red light come down. 40 people are treated for injuries and illnesses. They have low levels of hemoglobin. Some of them die and some waste away over months. This is very unusual, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. August of 77, director of the CIA, Admiral Turner, tells the Chicago Tribune that the government had a man who could see anywhere in the world. This is what the director of the CIA, and obviously he's talking about the remote viewing program at SRI. November 16th, 1977, of Close Encounters of the Third Kind comes out. NASA writes a 20-page letter prior to Steven Spielberg about how dangerous this film was because it probably was outing something called Project Serpo. Again, we'll talk about that with the 80s and with Reagan. And plus, Tanya and I think, have done 2 shows on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I invite you to visit those. In 1978, Stanton Friedman talks to Jesse Marcel, and this resurrects the whole Roswell thing. It was gone and forgotten if it hadn't been for Friedman's interest. Also in 78, a FOSI disinfo agent, Richard Doty, is read into the program. Supposedly, he's told about the crashed bodies at Roswell. The Greada Treaty is real. He explains Roswell thusly. 2 scout ships, so far so good, in a severe lightning storm, and that's what caused them to crash. Now, Greer says, no. We had pulse weapons embedded in radar. This is a way to answer those who go, these guys come from halfway across the universe and they crash when they get over the United States. What's the deal? Apparently, we had pulse weapons. It might have been accidental. It could have been reverse engineering, something like that. But it was a big problem. If you remember, when the EBEs were talking to various people, Ike and others, they were saying, please stop using these radars because they're crashing our ships and they're killing our people. Now, one of these 2 scout ships crashed at Corona, New Mexico, and it was brought to Los Alamos. This is the whole Roswell thing here. 2 dead EBAs, 1 alive in the Roswell crash. They also go to Los Alamos. They wind up eventually at Wright-Patterson. We've talked this pretty much to death. Doty supposedly saw closed-circuit television footage of an EBE in 1984 at S2 Annex at Groom Lake. Talk a lot about S4 on previous episodes. 1978, the National Intelligence Reorganization and Reform Act doesn't pass Congress after CIA pushback. Man, it is a juggernaut by this time, right? They've killed presidents. They totally undermined Ike. They got rid of Nixon because he thought that he had leverage on them, and they turned the tables on him. So there you go. September 6, 1978, again, we talk about this abductee, contactee episodes. Juan Perez has this really interesting UFO counter. If you're interested in that, Alan Stilvelman's 2019 documentary, Witness to Another World, is amazing. Jacques Vallée was involved. Juan Perez, long story short, saw a translucent building. Really reminds me of Carl Higdon's cube that he saw in Wyoming in 1974. In 79, there's this film that surfaces, supposedly showing an alien. This film was sent to filmmaker Chad Kallick, who's known for the Sir No Face trilogy, by a black hat called Daniel David Skyfall. Richard Doty also references the best thing that I can say with all these films. Take it with a grain of salt. Look at it. The Alien Fox, when they did the thing with Jonathan Frakes from Next Generation, Alien Autopsy, and all of that. And it's very tangled stuff. In 1979, Thomas Edwin Costello, a former security officer at Dulce Base since 71, who worked for RAND, the think tank, very powerful think tank, as a high security consultant, talks about these deep underground military bases, how humans, reptilians, and the reptilians worker class are all working there. Of course, Dulce's the big one. And in the 80s, Phil Snyder came out. So I'll talk about that then. I mentioned that there was one woman, at least, in the remote viewing crowd amongst all these men. And in the spring of 1979, Rosemary Smith locates a downed Soviet Tu-22 bomber in Zaire, Africa. This wound up blowing up the whole remote viewing program, or outing it for the public, because Carter talked about it. He talked about it at, I think, Emory University at a graduation commencement, and then he talked to a newspaper or magazine, something like that, or maybe it was Nightline, 60 Minutes, something like that. But anyway, they're like, Mr. President, you shouldn't be talking about this thing. But he was really jazzed by it. It was like, we could really do this. It was amazing. In June of 79, a man named R.C. Christian Rosicrucians, Christian Rosencreuz, hires Elberton Granite Association on behalf of a group of loyal Americans. Some people think that Ted Turner was one of these loyal Americans, planning the Georgia Guidestones. And we did a Red Thread Collective episode on the Georgia Guidestones that I'm very proud of. And he told them that it was going to serve as a compass, a calendar, and a clock. Well, were those compass, calendar, and clock, was that starting to tell people things? And that's why last year one of the monoliths was blown up, and then no investigation. It's just raised, carted away. Hey, nothing to see here, never existed, goes away. That was pretty crazy that happened. August 27th of 79, Lord Mountbatten, related to the royal family in England at the time, ambassador to various countries, a very, very powerful man, was killed. His boat was blown up, and it was blamed on the Irish Republican Army. But there are those that say he wanted disclosure, and that's why he was killed. In 79, John Marks's book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, the CIA and Mind Control, comes out. So Craig and I and the rest of us who say maybe this was programming, Sirhan, and all of that are not out of our minds. This guy did a great book on this. Also in 79, Charles Berlitz and Bill Moore, the Air Force disinformation specialist, complicit in driving Paul Benowitz crazy with the help of Doty. They write The Philadelphia Experiment, the true story behind Project Invisibility. Talked about that quite a bit. 79 is the start of the PSYOP campaign against Paul Benowitz by Doty Affosi and Bill Moore. 79, this is just an interesting thing. Maybe Craig and I will do a sinister mystery on the Priory of Sion, the bloodline of Jesus Christ. Well, it was in 79 that Peter Plantard claimed to be the head of the Priory of Zion. It led to Holy Blood, Holy Grail, all these really, the Spear of Destiny, the Mark of the Beast, all this kind of stuff, all these really controversial books. I reread them all last winter as part of a larger Grail project that I was working on. Really crazy, interesting stuff where you have these all these famous people who were the head of the Priory of Zion. Craig, I think that we should do this. Yeah, Joe Redmile says, love those books. They are an amazing read. They really do take you down some really interesting rabbit holes about sacred objects and bloodlines and all this kind of amazing stuff. And really, Dan Brown owes his career to that kind of stuff. Even had with the guys who did Holy Blood, Holy Grail, had a big court case, which was very, very odd, and everybody made out by selling tons and tons and tons of books. November 4th, 1979, so that was my 11th birthday. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Again, Iran comes up. 52 U.S. hostages taken. They are held for 444 days. This ends on January 20th, 1981, so we're going to be picking up with this when I do the 80s. They are released minutes after Carter leaves office. I'm sorry, I'm 3 minutes over the hour, but I'm almost done here. Reagan engineered this. Weirdly enough, Governor Connolly, who was a Democrat that was wounded, switched to the Republican Party, and he helped facilitate all this. So we'll get into all of that. December 24th, 1979, the Soviets invade Afghanistan. This is the rise of the Taliban and bin Laden. Again, everything that's happening now is tied to these policies in these days. And February 11th, 1979, just want to let you know, the Shah of Iran was overthrown and the Islamic republic established. And here we are with all these major players. Everybody stay safe. I'm hearing some things the next 2-3 days could potentially be rough. There are already some cities on high alert. You hear a lot of things. You hear a lot of things in the, not so much in the mainstream news, but in the independent media, and things that I'm hearing from colleagues and relationships that I've cultivated. So just be safe, especially if you're in the cities. Keep your eyes wide open. It could be the electric grid. It could be the water supply, or it could be something bigger. Hopefully it will be nothing at all. But tensions are at an all-time high now. Palestine and Israel has always been incredibly, incredibly thorny. Throughout all of history, that land has been highly contested. Everyone knows that. Plus, we have, Ukraine and all of that. But I want to get you out of here. I went 4 minutes over. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, thank you for staying with me. Everybody stay safe. I appreciate you all. I'm thinking about you. Keep your vibration high. Hug your kids. Hug your loved ones. Maybe have a little extra food. Maybe have a little extra water on hand, is what Joey's telling you. I don't know. So anyway, be safe. And we will see you next week. Hopefully broadcasting in a world that hasn't significantly changing, or not being able to broadcast at all. So good night, everyone. Much love, DA, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everyone. Be well. I will talk to you soon. Appreciate you all.